Hello, everybody. Once upon a time in America, there were three big networks. One was called ABC, one was called CBS, one was called NBC, and it put out a lot of content that was trusted by people. One example was CBS Evening News, put on by a man called Walter Cronkite, who was known as the most trusted man in America. Some people are nostalgic for this period in American media history where we trusted our news. Of course, today in our internet age, our age of conspiracy and social media, people don't seem to trust anything or anyone. Another media phenomenon that shattered this tradition of CBS and ABC and NBC was the appearance of a network called Univision, which was founded, I think, in the late 1960s and created an alternative for Spanish language speaking Americans. And we have a new history of Univision by my guest today, Javier Marin. The book is called Live from America, How Latino TV Conquered the United States. And Javier is joining us from Marin. Javier, congratulations on the book. I know it's out this week. Spanish version was out a few weeks ago. Should we in any way be nostalgic for the age of Walter Cronkite, the most trusted man in America?
Yeah, according to our generation, I will include you in my generation. Yes, definitely we felt more, let's say, not more informed, but more secure of the information we were receiving, feeling-wise.
So tell me the story of how Latino TV fits in with the shattering of this monopolization by the three networks. Is it a piece of the end of trust or the beginning of another? I know your book suggests that Latino TV represents the realization of the dream to millions of Hispanics in the United States. Were the old networks seen as being white networks, Javier?
Yeah, well, there were some efforts from some people, like remember Ricky Ricardo, Desi Arnaz, who in the show of Lucille Ball, he used to speak Spanish in some of the episodes and sing in Spanish and embrace the language in the U.S. But then after a while, that was censored, and the Spanish was not more fluency. The fluency of Spanish in the country was not that usual anymore. So
let me just I don't mean to interrupt, but you used the word censored. Who was censoring it? Was this an official censorship or a media censorship?
It was a media censorship. There was some sort of movements. There has always been a movement in the U.S. to try to stop the use of the Spanish language. Since the early 1900s, Theodore Roosevelt, for example, was one of the promoters of the only English in the U.S. So there was always that type of movement. And that's how I would say the opportunity came for a Mexican family, which in the early 60s decided to purchase a small TV station in San Antonio. But this Mexican family had already an important network of TVs in Mexico.
San Antonio. Was the family associated with Emilio Nicolas? Is that the family?
That is correct. He was the founder of that small TV station in San Antonio, Emilio Nicolas Sr. And but then this Mexican family, the Escarraga family, was the one that had the vision of replicating what they had in Mexico, but in the U.S. So they started to buy low-power TV stations in the U.S. Remember, those 3-bit networks were the only FCC-authorized national TV networks: CBS, ABC, and NBC. And but the Mexican family, through another American-born citizen called Reynold Anselmo, who was an employee of the Escarragas in Mexico. He was born actually in the suburbs of Boston, but spoke perfect Spanish, and very eloquent individual that knew the culture, Mexican culture, living there for a couple of years, and then transferred to the U.S. And so he was commissioned to start buying small TV stations, and that's what he did.
You've talked about the founder, and you've talked about the way in which the English networks, the ABCs, the CBSs, and the NBCs, to borrow a word from you, censored the use of the Spanish language. Was then the founding of Univision in the late 60s, was it in a sense a political development? I mean, obviously it was founded to make money as a media network, but was there some anger behind it that speaking Spanish was supposedly un-American? You mentioned Teddy Roosevelt.
Yeah, that's how the opportunity flourished. But remember, it wasn't called Univision at that time. It was called Spanish International Network. That was the name of that TV station in San Antonio, and that was the name of the network. That then, the fascinating story is how it became Univision. So there was a law in the United States that forbid any foreigner, any national network, TV network, to be owned by more than 25% of foreign shareholders. So the Mexican family used this guy born in Boston to try to evade that law. But then a litigation came between minority shareholders and the Mexican family, and also the FCC started to investigate the foreign ownership on the Spanish International Network.
How did then, if those were the laws, how did Murdoch get around that?
Well, Murdoch was Australian, remember, he was born in Australia, and he became American citizen in 1985, knowing, my investigation, he was always wanted to build a national TV network in the U.S. That's why he became American citizens. And also Ted Turner wanted to build a national TV network.
Yeah, but Turner, of course, did and built CNN. But at least Turner was from Atlanta. I mean, he was American.
Yes, he didn't have that problem. But in order to get the fourth network, remember, there was not a national fourth network. And so the FCC investigation on the foreign ownership of Spanish International Network, everybody knew it as SIN, was almost trying to cancel the FCC license to SIN. So there was this rumor of the national and a fourth national TV network being available in 1987. But then a lot of diplomatic relationship between Mexico and the U.S., and it ended up with a law, a sentence from a federal court in California that decided to force the sale of the Mexican family was forced to sell their shares on the station. And that's in 1986, when Hallmark Cards, a company from Missouri that had nothing to do with any Hispanic culture or origin, was the buyer.
So you yourself are a media entrepreneur. You're founder of the Tiempo company, which still exists. Your tagline is reality decoded for Latinos. I'm not sure whether reality is different from Latinos as it is from Anglos or other peoples. Coming back to this idea of this dream of Hispanics, let's go back to the 60s. For Hispanic people living in the United States, either may or may not have spoke English as their first language, was their dream of a network, was the dream of a network in Spanish, or was the dream of a network presented to Hispanics? I mean, maybe both. I hope that's a clear question.
The first dream was all in Spanish. The visionary from Mexico knew that the immigration of Mexicans to the U.S. was growing and growing. 1960s, we had 3.5 million, mostly Mexicans and mostly workers. That adding this is the immigration. That remember that there was a lot.
So
big territory.
3.5 million. You say we. You mean 3.5 million Hispanic population in the United States?
In the United States, correct. And in the 1960s, most of them were, the territories that were before was Mexico, part of Arizona, all California, all Texas, all Nevada, part of Utah. And so there were Spanish-speaking people, and they respected the U.S. respected the use of the language and the culture because it was signed on the rendition of Mexico in 1848. There was a treaty called Guadalupe Hidalgo, where the U.S. have to respect this, give them the citizenship of the U.S., but also respect their cultures and their language. And so that's why the Spanish-speaking was, free to use in those territories. Always with a part of the population against the use of Spanish language.
So you talk about 3.5 million Hispanic population in the U.S. in the 60s or late 60s. What is it now, Javier?
It's according to the census of 2020, 62.1 million. So the evolution of
that, quite a growth, yeah.
Yes,
I mean,
and I can give you a summary of why in the economic crisis. Before, most of the immigrants came to work, send money back home, and their families stayed at home. So it was mainly men who came to work and send money and to their families. But then 70s and 80s, a global economy crisis pushed a lot of families to immigrate to the United States looking for the American dream. So in the 70s, Hispanics were 9.6 million, remember? Different ethnicities coming, different countries of origins coming through the East, down to the West. The West, mainly Mexican and Central American, the East, Caribbean, and South American. Then in the 80s, it went up to 4.6, always related to the global economies situation,
yeah,
like
Cuba,
the default in Mexico, etc. Huh?
Right, and you yourself came from Venezuela. When did you come to the U.S.?
Year 2000, 25 years ago.
So it's a remarkable jump. And in terms of this growth of 3.5 million Hispanics in the late 60s, when Univision was founded, to 62.1 million today, how do these two stories interact? Has presumably, I know that Univision wasn't originally Univision, but now it is. It's the dominant platform for Hispanic Americans, dominant media platform. What led to the other? Would Univision have become Univision if you hadn't had such a dramatic rise in Hispanic Americans?
Well, there are several events that happened that are with details in the book that how the government of the United States was convinced to encapsulate the whole Spanish-speaking community with one word. It was in 1969, Richard Nixon commissioned a committee to encapsulate everybody that speaks Spanish with one word. That's how Hispanic, even though literally doesn't mean that, in the US, Hispanic is the word that encapsulates everybody. That means that the government was already seeing a potential, political engine, not only economic engine, but a political engine. Most of them were becoming citizens, and of
course, voting. Nixon was himself from Southern California, so he was all too familiar with Hispanic culture.
And then Ronald Reagan came, the former governor of California, and he was the one who also embraced the Hispanic Heritage Month and the whole, embracing the Hispanic culture. And Univision was key because, having one, and then Telemundo came in at the same time at the end of the 80s. It was key to control most of the narrative to the whole Hispanic market. And it grew exponentially, not only with audience, but also in money. It became a multi-billion-dollar company, which is still right now.
What about the politics of all this? Of course, Reagan and Nixon, both Californians, Republicans. Nixon revolutionized American politics, in some ways turned it on its head with his so-called Southern strategy. What were the politics of typically, and I know that's a generalization, typical politics of the 3.5 million Hispanic people in America in the 60s, and how did that change as they became over 62 million today?
Yeah, I would say the main catalyst of the political power of the Hispanic vote came driven by the exponential growth of the population and the national TV networks. Because you had, local newspapers and some radio stations, but the national network of TV I would say, pushed by corporate and government money, make a huge effective way to communicate to this population. So the politics at that time in the 60s, the first senator in Texas, for example, was not a big surprise because Lyndon Johnson endorsed him, but it was the national Spanish TV that for the first time showed some power on the political arena. And now you see the number of political leaders, Hispanic political leaders, and in every, and not only party, but also on the officers in the government and states.
Javier, a number of progressives have come on this show, and I'm generally quoting them, they talk about black and brown people who, in their minds at least, have similar interests and are similarly victimized by neoliberal American capitalism. What kind of relations, in broad terms, did the Hispanic community have with other minorities, particularly African Americans?
Well, there is a big difference on the community identified with the national Spanish TV network, which is language. The Spanish-speaking population is 60 million. Out of those 60 million, more than half, a little bit more than half, are bilingual, speak English. We still have 25, 30 million people that speak very bad English in the country. And so there is a difference there. But there is also an important African-American, African-Latino population that participates actively in society. But the big growth of the Hispanic community from 9.6 to 4.6 in the 80s, 2.3 in the 90s, 3.5 in the 2000, and then from 2000 to 2020 went from 35 million to 60, not 3.5, 35 million to 60 million in the last less than 3 decades, right? 20 years. So it became a political engine, and in order to see it as just one community is very difficult. Business-wise, is easy because there is this word Hispanic. These are 2 national TV networks that sell to all corporate America to send them the messages. All those 60 millions, a lot of them watch Telemundo, Univision, still watching Telemundo and Univision because of the programming, the soap operas, the very cultural programming, which is different. Actually, it's great to mention when Hallmark Cards bought the network, they tried to pull out the Mexicans from the executive positions, trying to build an American TV station in Spanish. That's how the slogan they wanted to say, but it didn't work. They tried to do an opera in Spanish. They tried to do a Grammy Awards in Spanish. They did it with names, but the opera in Spanish, Cristina Saralegui, was completely different editorially.
Seems like the reverse has happened. Now Americans are watching Hispanic sports, like what Americans call soccer, or the rest of the world calls football. You had an interesting post, Javier, on LinkedIn. You ask, do you ever wonder why you hear Spanish everywhere in the United States? Is the answer to that question Telemundo and Univision?
It's part of it, yes, a key part of it, and the growth of the prosperity, that is searched by anyone in the United States. You want prosper, educated workers. You need them, and but the national TV networks has been key on the evolution of this community nationwide.
How does it break down? Coming back to your question of why you hear Spanish everywhere in the US. I mean, to do a bit of research for this show, I've been looking at Univision. There is, of course, an English version. In terms of these networks, what proportion are read or listened to or watched in Spanish versus English? Is it almost universally Spanish?
Yes, almost all. Even in the book, you will also find out failures of Univision trying to become, also English speaking. Remember, Univision bought the Onion, and they started a TV network together with Disney called Fusion. None of those projects worked.
As the issue of Hispanics and obviously immigration becomes more and more politicized, again, to do some research for this, I was looking at some headlines from Univision. California strikes back against Trump's anti-immigrant policies was one. After the raids, life is put on hold is another. Third was essential but deportable, which perhaps summarizes how many people think about what the Trump people are doing these days. How politicized now is Univision or Latino TV, particularly in MAGA America?
I would first say that the two networks have been always politicized because the biggest driver to the Hispanic vote has always been these two national networks. The biggest money absorption, the money absorbing the two national networks advertising money coming from the political sides are huge. But nowadays it's more than ever because political maneuvers of this administration, and I don't think it's working. The whole ICE immigration, and it was reflected in recent elections. I believe that dignity and vote are goes together. If you lose dignity, you lose your vote, and that's more or less what happened in the recent elections. But to answer your question, the politicization of the political involvement in the narrative of Telemundo and Univision have always been an important factor with Democrats and with Republican governments.
It's quite controversial. I know that there was one point where Univision took out an ad touting Trump's praise on Truth Social, and some people have criticized Univision, believing that they betrayed their immigrant audience, particularly over the ICE raids and the immigration debate in the US. What's your take, Javier? Have the networks, in particular Univision, has it behaved heroically or not?
Well, the facts are described in the book. There was a controversial. Let's go back to the Biden times. There was a controversial ejection of the main anchor of Univision, Jorge Ramos, from a press conference of then the candidate for presidency, Donald Trump. He ejected him and told him go back to Univision. And then years later, there was a sale of Univision to another group, and then there was a very soft exclusive interview with Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago, with the presence of shareholders of Univision. If that represents, how editorially they are being supportive or non-supportive to the government, to the Trump administration, it's looking at the facts. But what's happening now, I mean, they are also broadcasting what's happening with the community in terms of the deportation and the physical aggressiveness against the community. So it's a kind of difficult to decide if they are pro MAGA, aggressively pro MAGA, but events has happened, and all of them are described in the book.
You're very diplomatic. I mean, in the elections earlier this month, a lot of the headlines are about one from MSNBC, which is, of course, a progressive network, why Latino voters turned out against Trump. ABC talks about Latino voters reversing last year's swing towards Trump, particularly in New Jersey and Virginia, and others talk about the Dems making gains with Latino voters in New Jersey and Virginia. What's your take on
the treatment? The treatment to this community has been so harsh and unfair that, again, the dignity is being lost by many in the community. And when you lose dignity, whoever is on the power doing that aggressiveness lose the vote.
And as I said, you're a former media executive at Tiempo, which is still going. It's run by your family now. Is that sentiment, do you think, shared by the senior executives at Univision?
On the executive side, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's they are on a survival mode, economically speaking. So they are making decisions business-wise that maybe will be. They are not owned by Latinos. I mean, remember, well, they have a Mexican group still as a shareholder, but maybe private equity have been on top of Univision. And if we go to Telemundo, NBC Universal are the ones who own them. So I think they're behaving very careful on their content decision. I'll go back to the history. When there was an event in the mid 1980s when the Mexican family tried to put a Mexican director of news in Florida, and at that time Mexico was friend of Fidel Castro, and so the whole news staff in the Miami station, which broadcast the national news, resigned. So the news room of Univision at that time emptied because journalists were against the position of the owners. So I think something like that could happen.
There's a lot of also interesting politicization of media. Trump recently called on Google to bring Univision back to YouTube TV. Are Telemundo and Univision, are they being distributed on platforms like YouTube? What are the economics and politics of this? Why are these so controversial? And why is Trump even publicly calling on Google to allow Univision back onto YouTube?
Yeah, that political move of Trump promoting asking Google to include Univision, it was definitely a radical message of some sort of arrangement between. And he even said Univision is being good to Republicans, I remember. But if we go back to the distribution of Univision and Telemundo, there has always been controversy between cable operators carrying Univision and Telemundo. In the past, there have always been negotiations in which Univision and Telemundo is, being treated unfairly, let's say, compared with other networks, because most of the cable operators, in the moment of negotiations, they try to put the Spanish TV stations in one different, more expensive or different rate card. So that negotiation of distribution of Telemundo and Univision content before in cable operators, now in the streaming operators, is not surprising. What surprised is the president getting involved.
Let's end by stepping back, Javier. The dream, as you note in your book, was for Spanish-speaking Americans, so-called Latinos, or the term invented by Richard Nixon, was to have media in their own language. That happened. Now these networks are very large. You have a much larger Hispanic community. And yet, on the other hand, everything seems to be a return almost to the 19th century. We have increasingly aggressive anti-immigrant rhetoric, politics on the part of Donald Trump. We even have Trump now striking against Venezuela. We have, it seems in a way, a return to the Monroe Doctrine of the 19th century. America increasingly behaving like a colonial power in Latin America, in Spanish-speaking America. You're from Venezuela originally. I'm sure you have strong feelings on this. Has media changed anything? I mean, you've written this media history. It's not a social or political history. It's a history of Latino TV. But has anything really changed in the 60 years since we've had the emergence of Latino TV? Or has America remain, in a way, a kind of colonial power, particularly in its attitude, not just to Latino people, but to Latin America?
Well, as I said before, for the sentiment, the anti-immigrant and anti-Spanish speaking in the U.S. sentiment has always existed. The big difference and the victory has been always on the side of the Hispanic community being able to keep prospering. This is not another enclave in a Western country, another enclave of immigrants in a Western country. This is a part of America. It's Spanish speaking. And remember, at that time, when you talk about the 90s, we were 23 million. Now it's 3 times that number.
62.1 and growing.
So it's a very powerful engine. Even if you deport 3 million, we still 57 million, and to relate that to the foreign affairs. I think that's like going on reverse if we talk about the position of the U.S. Towards Latin America. But the U.S. Hispanic seen as a sub-country. Now, Andrew, the U.S. is the second largest country of Spanish-speaking people in the world. We passed already Spain, Argentina. It's only Mexico and then U.S.
You're ever going to have a football team, Javier, that can compete on the international stage?
Imagine, yeah. So the whole
maybe.
By the way, soccer in the U.S. has been growing because of Univision and the history of how FIFA and the World Cup of Mexico 1970, the first one transmitted live via
that may explain actually why Donald Trump's become so chummy with FIFA and Infantino. I'm thinking you've got this new book, Live from America. I've got this show, Keen on America. Maybe I should have a Hispanic version, Javier. Maybe you can be our Hispanic correspondent.
Well, let's talk. Definitely, there is always opportunities, but first, we should try to convince everybody to, not because it's my book, but this is a story that people should not take for granted that the Spanish speaking around you that could be annoying. Is it annoying for you, Andrew, when you hear another table in your restaurant speaking Spanish?
I'm annoyed by everything. English speakers, Spanish speakers, China. It doesn't matter what it is. It irritates me, Javier. So I don't have any particular annoyance for Hispanic speakers.
Okay. Well, the reality is that the Spanish-speaking population keeps growing, and there's no way you can stop it. It wasn't possible when it were less than 10 million. I don't think it will be possible in the next decades. We should not take for granted that power, but it's a reality now.
Well, that's the reality. Wise words from Javier Marin, the author of Live from America, How Latino TV Conquered the U.S. An important book, not just because it's about media, but perhaps the most important, consequential, social, economic, cultural development in America over the last 60 years. So, Javier, congratulations on the new book. And if I have a Keen on America in Spanish, you can be my correspondent. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew. I'll send you my resume.